Hi everyone, welcome to the Whiteleyverse with me, Connor Whiteley, for another daily story with a chapter from one of my novellas. Before I start today's chapter, please remember to like, comment and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content, and the engagement really helps the Whiteleyverse with the YouTube algorithm. Also, if you want to buy this book and any of my other fiction, then they're all available from all major ebook retailers. You can order the paperback and hardback copies from Amazon, your local bookstore and local library if you requested. Also, if you want the AI generated audiobook, then you can get it from selected audiobook platforms and library systems like Kobo, Spotify, Barnes & Noble, Google Play, Baker & Taylor, Biblioteca and Overdrive. Now, here's today's chapter. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did writing it.
Chapter 1. The 23rd of June 2023. Canterbury, England. Private Eye Bettie English sat on her large black sofa in her living room, watching her two sweet little angels playing about on the blue rug in the middle of their hard, light wooden floor. Betty loved Harrison and Elizabeth more than anything else in the entire world, and she would definitely do anything to protect them. They were her entire beautiful world. She dressed them both in her matching white baby grows, and Betty loved that they were twins, so it was never too much of a nightmare to find each other's clothes. Most days Harrison wore the clothes that Betty had bought for Elizabeth, and vice versa. Betty really didn't mind because they were babies and looked so cute whatever they were wearing. Betty's mother-in-law was sitting on the other black sofa watching the kids in her white shorts and t-shirt, and Betty had to admit, set against the blackness of the sofa, she did look a little odd. The oddness was made even worse by the immense canvas of a beach hanging above the sofa. Sometimes Betty wished the canvas would fall off and land on her boyfriend's mother's head, but Betty loved her really. She was great with the kids, and she had been living life as much as she could since the lung cancer diagnosis 2 months ago. The day was fantastically warm, with bright rays of sunlight shining proudly through the opened windows, allowing a nice cool breeze to flow through the living room. Betty liked how the wind carried the sweet aromas of freshly cut grass, sausages and mint, allowing the great taste of summer barbecues to form on her tongue. This was going to be a brilliant day. And later on, Betty fully intended to take the kids out to the park for a picnic with her nephew Sean and his boyfriend Harry. The kids could crawl about and maybe do some walking, holding onto trees and whatnot. It would be perfect. Betty really wished that her boyfriend Detective Graham Adams was here to enjoy this great day with them, but he was sadly on jury service. Apparently him being a cop didn't make him biased in the eyes of the legal system, even though Betty was surprised by that, and the entire jury had been cut off from the outside because the nature of the case. The judge believed because that the person believed to have committed a group of murders was a former refugee but pillar of the local communities he served, and the sheer increase in far-right hate from the UK government towards refugees at the moment, he believed that the jury could be influenced by all of those factors. Betty really missed Graham, but closing arguments were meant to be heard today, and then it would be a simple matter of deciding if the person was guilty or not. "Mama," Harrison said, padding his cute little hands on Betty's shin. "Climb up," Betty said, holding her hands to catch him in case he fell. Graham's mother didn't seem to bat an eyelid, and Betty was really starting to get concerned about how the cancer was spreading. Harrison stood up and smiled and laughed before he fell back down. "Well done," Betty said. "You tried really hard there." Harrison smiled as he zoomed back over to his sister, and made a few intelligent-sounding words, but Betty couldn't understand the rest. She loved babies. Betty's phone buzzed, and Elizabeth started zooming over to her, so Betty just laughed. "Dada?" Elizabeth asked. Betty checked her phone, and amazingly enough, Elizabeth was actually right. Maybe kids were psychics after all. Betty answered it, and realized it wasn't Graham's normal number. It was a courthouse line, that meant this was one of the supervised calls, the only calls the jury were allowed to have. "Hi babe," Betty said. Graham breathed in deep. "I can't talk for long, and of course these calls are being monitored." Closing arguments and deliberations are happening today, and I really wish the research and talking sections of the jury code weren't about. Love you, and I'll see you soon, I hope. Graham cut the line and Betty just grinned. She knew her wonderful boyfriend way too well to know that he wasn't sending her a message of sorts. It was illegal as hell for a member of a jury to research or talk about the case outside of the courtroom. Of course, everyone still did that, and Graham was a cop, so he would always follow the law. Yet Betty knew that Graham was basically talking about the case right now, and he was sending her a message. He wanted her to research and investigate the case herself. She was a private eye, and she was the president of the British Private Eye Federation with more power than governments of small countries, and now Betty really wanted to look at the case herself. And Graham would only be risking his reputation and position on the jury if he had only come to one conclusion. This man was innocent, and he wasn't sure if the other 11 members on the jury could be convinced of that simple fact. Graham was an amazing cop, and if he thought this man was innocent, then Betty was going to believe him more than anything. "You know what, guys," Betty said to her little angels. "How would you like to spend the day with Uncle Sean and Harry?" The two kids shot over to her and started patting her shins as encouragement. Betty was actually grateful they couldn't speak properly yet, because she would have hated to find out who her kids preferred more, her or Sean. It was probably a tight race that depended on how many sweets each of them breaded the kids with. "Sean!" Betty shouted. She laughed as she heard panicked voices upstairs, and Betty really didn't want to know what Sean and Harry were doing, but after a moment, the kids were already at the bottom of the baby gate, and Betty just looked at Graham's mother. She wasn't looking too good, and that really worried Betty. Betty went over to her and knelt on the ground. The poor elderly woman was staring into space, and her cheeks were pale and her eyes were almost glassy. Betty doubted she even knew that she was here looking at her. Betty gently pushed her shoulders, and after a few tries, Graham's mother shook her head and smiled like she had just woken up from a bad dream. Then Graham's mother's face turned. "I didn't do it again, did I?" Betty nodded. "It's the second time today, 7th time this week. We need to get you to a hospice or hospital or something." Graham's mother shook her head. "Remember our deal with Graham? I was a bad mother for decades, and gave him more hate than I ever should have given him. I've worked so hard to be a great mother and grandmother these past 2 months. I don't want him to remember me as a senile old woman." Betty nodded. She knew that Graham's mother wanted them to assist her with her own suicide, and legally it was wrong as hell. But Betty understood why she wanted to do it. Graham's mother wanted her son to remember her as the sweet, loving mother she had been for the past 2 months, instead of turning into a senile woman that didn't even know who her son was. It would be impossible, but Betty understood it, and she was never thrilled about the idea in the first place, but it was the right thing to do. "Graham needs me to quietly investigate something anyway. After the case is done, the 3 of us will have a real conversation, I promise," Betty said. Graham's mother weakly smiled. "Could I help if it's about Graham?" Betty wasn't sure. "It's an illegal investigation, about a jury. Please, Betty. Just let me do one more thing for Graham before I die. Please?" Betty hated how she was always a softie for a dying person. "Fine." And as she watched her mother-in-law pop up, and they both dashed out the door, Betty couldn't deny how excited she was that she got to illegally investigate a crime that was being deliberated, and an innocent man's fate was about to be sealed forever. Betty loved working to a deadline, but even she knew this was one she probably couldn't keep.
Welcome back, everyone. It's me again, Connor Whiteley. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's story, because I flat out love writing, creating stories and sharing them with you. If you really enjoyed today's story, then please remember to like, comment and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content, and the internet engagement really helps the Whiteleyverse with the YouTube algorithms. And if you want to buy this short story or any of my other fiction, then they're available from all major ebook retailers, and you can get them from your local library if you requested, and you can order the paperback copies from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. Lastly, if you want to support the channel on a one-off basis, then you can now buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. Also, if you know anyone who would enjoy today's story, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the channel. So, thanks for watching the Whiteley verse, and I'll see you again soon. Have a great day, everyone.